First of all,
Good afternoon.
all right. My name is Marcus Chapman. Just give you a little background on me. I am not from Dallas. I'm from Chicago. Uh, I started collecting music when I was about 4 years old. I was a little kid. We had remember the big radios that you used to have in the living room where you have to lift the top off and no, not quite like that one. That's a little old.
So you're too young for that, aren't you?
Right, I'm a little too young for that one. But we had the record player and it had the arm and it had the so I grew up with that, and I remember being a little kid just listening to the radio while I was in the living room playing. And I come from a family that was heavily into music, collecting records, albums, album covers were a big deal to me when I was a little kid. And eventually I started getting them myself. I got the first one, my first trip to the record store to buy an album when I was 4 years old. And every time I smell incense, it takes me right back to the record store because that's what the store smelled like. And so as I got a little older, I started to go to my relatives' houses. This is toward the end of the 80s. And I started asking them, hey, you got any old records you don't want? Oh, yeah, you can have all these records. Yeah, sure. So I started collecting like that. And when I got to college, I started actually playing them on the radio. And I got into radio as a career. I did it for 3 years in college. And then when I graduated, I started working in Chicago as like a studio assistant. Back then, at that time, everything wasn't digital yet. So the person who was on the air would do the talking and all of that, but there was usually someone else in the studio who would have to pull the music and the commercials, and they were on carts. They looked like 8-track tapes, one song or one commercial. So I would do that and take requests. But in the meantime, I would also go to what we had called the third studio, which you had an FM, you had an AM, and you had a third studio where they didn't broadcast. Sometimes they would do recorded shows, and I would go in there and practice. I would take the CDs and I'd take the information that the radio station would use to like talk about events or whatever. I would practice. I kept doing that while I was doing the other jobs, and eventually I got on here myself in Chicago, and I worked there for 4 years, and then I got really good, and I got hired to work in Indianapolis. I was there doing a night show, 6 to 10 weeknights, and while I was there, I started getting noticed by stations in other cities, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, a couple cities in North Carolina, Miami. I wanted that job bad. I was 27. I wanted to party in Miami on the number one station. Life would have been a lot different. But I ended up, one of the stations that that noticed me was a station here, Dallas Fort Worth, KKDA, which is known as K14. So they were the ones who actually ended up hiring me. And I was here back in 2001, 2002. After my stint here, I ended up going back to Chicago. I was in Atlanta for a few years, and then I moved back here, and I'm currently heard on 97.9 The Beat, which is a Radio 1 hip-hop station. Now, at the same time while all that's going on, I've always been what I call a music historian and a collector. Not just collecting music, but doing research, reading books, gathering information, whether it was autobiographies or books about particular types of music, particular genres, particular eras, and watching a lot of documentaries and just gathering all of this information. And a couple of the books that really influenced me are what I would call music research books, where you don't have a story that goes from beginning to end. It's individual write-ups about an artist or particular songs. And there was one called the Billboard Book of #1 Rhythm and Blues Hits. That was the first one I got like that. And I sat in the bookstore for hours because I didn't have any money that day. But I was looking at it like, wow, they got this song and that song. So eventually I got that, and I started collecting books and doing my research. Now, after I moved back here, before I joined the station that I'm on, there was a waiting period because sometimes in radio, the station wants to hire someone, but the people who own the station say, well, no, not just yet. We need to wait, So while I was doing that, waiting period, my birthday was coming up 2 years ago. And I decided that I wanted to put together what I called an all-star team of songs. I love the baseball All-Star game. It's my favorite sport. So it's Tuesday. I'm not working on watching baseball. So I want to put together this all-star team of songs that was sort of like, if I could never hear anything else, these are the songs that I would want to hear and be able to present to other people. Some of them are among the greatest songs of all time by some of the greatest artists. Some of them are a little more obscure, maybe album cuts. If you didn't have the album, you wouldn't know it. Or in some cases, they're artists who just maybe never heard of, maybe didn't hit it big, but they still had great music. And in some cases, the music has been used to create other music that has become better known in recent years. So the whole all-star team ended up being, I wanted 100 songs. I quickly found out that wasn't enough. So I turned it into 500, which, believe it or not, still wasn't enough. But the idea of 500 is more distinct. It's more distinguished than, say, 600 or 700. So I called the whole thing the MC 500. It was an online project. What I did is I did short write-ups about each song, just give a little bit of information, and I posted them on Facebook and Twitter. Now, the trick came where I was already friends online with some of the artists, some of the members of some of the great bands, Sly and Family Stone, Following Funkadelic, Ohio Players, Cool in the Gang, Isaac Brothers. And so what happened when I would post these clips from YouTube so people could hear the song and read what I wrote, their fans were able to see what I wrote because I would tag them in the post. And in some cases, they saw what I wrote. And sometimes they actually hit me and say, well, hey, you know, so-and-so sang on this. We use this type of bass guitar. We use this technique. You know, just adding in extra information. I said, okay, this is pretty interesting. So I decided I wanted to preserve the whole thing in book form. Originally just for myself, just so I could flip through and look at it. But I also knew that I was getting so much response from people that it was something people could use. And particularly since we're in an era now where people like to go online, go on YouTube, or all these different outlets to find music, it was a way to kind of enlighten people on songs that they maybe didn't know or give them more information about songs that they did know. And it spans about over 40 years, and it's all different genres. So you got rhythm and blues, you got funk, you got hard rock, soft rock, jazz, disco, reggae, hip hop, some of everything. And so now, here we are. All right. Now, originally it was supposed to be one book, but I had to deal with a publisher, and they said, well, you should split it in half. And I said, okay. Eventually, they gave me the rights back to it, and I put it out myself, but I decided to stick with that concept. So this is volume 1. And it came out June 2nd, and volume 2 should be out probably around September. As I was going through it, the manuscript, before I even submitted it, I was looking at like, wow, it's DC, yeah, classic hits, little notes. I'm like, man, this has got to be the coolest music book ever made. And then I just went ahead and I was going through it. And then the next day, I had the same thoughts. I said, why don't I just call it that? So as a result, became the coolest music book ever made, aka the MC 500, MC Volume 1. Real quick, with the cover, as you see over here, this is the bigger display that we use for people to see. But I wanted something that looked like an album cover. Growing up in the 70s as a kid, like I said, album covers were a big deal, and they used to use a lot of artwork. So I wanted it to look like something like a Parliament Funkadelic type of album. You know, a lot of acts use different artwork. And in order to really represent what was inside, I felt it would be best to have drawings of some of the artists who are contained inside the 500. So that's what you see on the front and on the back. All of these artists have